Hello, we will begin the fifth lecture on missiology. Today, we will learn about number 3, the monastic system. Christianity's monastic system was born in the 3rd century. However, the monastic system started its rapid development after Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion. After Christianity became the state religion, the church became formalized and it drifted from the faith. In reaction to this phenomenon, the monastic system came to life under godly Christians. There are negative aspects of the monastic system. Those are as follows. In other words, the system produced people of great faith. The system was applied as a missionary organization. John Wycliffe, Jan Hus, Martin Luther, and others came from monasteries. Next, we will look at several monastic orders. Number 1. The Benedictines. This order was the first of the Western Church. Benedict of Nursia, 480 to 543 AD, founded this order. He was a prominent figure who set an example for monks. The Benedictines rapidly grew to have in their name around 37. Most were in France, and some were in Italy, Sicily, and Spain. This order focused on education and literature work. Although this group did not do missionary work, it contributed greatly to the expansion of Christianity and Christian civilization. Because Benedictines wore black robes and hoods, they were called the Black Monks. Number 2. The Franciscans. This monastic order was founded by Francis of Assisi, 1182 to 1226 AD. Members of this order took vows of celibacy, poverty, and obedience. The monastic movement found its origin after Francis' dramatic conversion. Monks of this order were called fratres minores because they wore gray uniforms. They were also called Grey Friars. In order to evangelize the Saracen Empire, this group participated in the Crusade Wars. They also produced famous theologians. They sent more missionaries than any other order. They even sent missionaries to China and the Far East. Number 3. The Dominicans. This order was founded at around the same time as the Franciscans. The Spanish monk Dominic, 1170 to 1221 AD, founded it. Members were called the Dominicans rapidly grew into a theological missionary group. As the Pope's representatives, the Dominicans became notorious for their cruel punishment of those who criticized the papal system. Their religious trials stained the reputation of the Roman Church. Number 4. The Jesuits. The Jesuits are the most well-known order of the orders we previously talked about. The order was founded by Ignatius Loyola, 1491 to 1556 AD. Francis Xavier led the order's missionary movement. They did missions work in India, China, Japan, South Africa, Mexico, Canada, and other places. It is the largest order of the Roman Catholic Church. Chapter 7. Missions in the time of the Religious Reformation. This period stretches from the time of Luther's religious reformation to the time of the missionaries of Halle. The time period is from 1517 to 1650. Number 1. The relationship between the religious reformation and missionary work. The religious reformation not only changed the state of the church in every way, but it opened up a new situation in the history of the world. The religious reformation was a fight against the pagan fact that were in Christianity. Furthermore, the religious reformation was a justified movement of faith that was based on the Bible. However, we need to know that the religious reformation was not a missions movement. It was a movement to remove non-Christian factors present within the church. The movement worked to build a proper church on the foundation of the Christian faith. Therefore, there was a lack of direct missionary work concerning the outside world. Reformers somewhat neglected evangelism of the surrounding world. During this time, the Roman Catholic Church expanded its missions territory to Asia and the Americas. As the Roman Church lost its footing in Europe, it began finding new places for missions. Regardless, the reformers did the foundational work for future missionary activity. One important thing they did was to translate the Bible. The translation of the Bible was a new weapon for the expansion of missions. The translation of the Bible allowed for the correct delivery of Christ's teachings. Conclusively, we can say that the religious Reformation did not directly produce a missionary movement, but it did the foundational work for missions. Number 2, the shape of missions. Because of the religious Reformation was divided between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants. The Roman Catholic Church showed a zeal for missions, with Jesuit missionaries at the heart of missions. The Roman Catholic Church went to different regions for missions. The Roman Catholic Church's most representative missionary is Francis Xavier of the Jesuits. He was Loyola's disciple and co-worker. He traveled to India and Japan for missions. His missionary work bore many fruits. During his 2.5-year stay in Japan, he saw several thousand converters. While the Roman Church vigorously did missions work, the Protestant Church did almost nothing. The Netherlands and Britain worked to make colonies in different places of the world. Pastors joined this movement, which resulted in forced evangelism rather than missions. The missionary work based on colonies in different regions of Asia did not bear much fruit. During the religious Reformation, the Protestant Church did not come up with a detailed plan on how to carry out missions. Chapter 8. The time of the early mission association. A newfound enthusiasm for missions stemmed from the re-emergence of the faith of the apostolic age. Churches of future generations need to learn from the missions that came with the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. Modern-day missionary work has its roots in the religious Reformation. The religious Reformation was a rediscovery of the Bible, for it discovered the core principles of the Bible. However, the Reformers did not offer a clear view on missions. As a result, the time of the religious Reformation was a time of the absence of missions. During this time, churches focused on doctrine. There were disputes about doctrine. Several leaders made the effort to increase zeal for missions. Consequently, we see a new shape of missions. Number 1. Increase zeal for missions. Von Wells is a representative figure in doing this. As Baron of Austria, he pushed for the Church's missions from 1164. He created the framework of modern missions and emphasized the Church's duty of missions. In order to raise up missionaries, he proposed the establishment of colleges. Von Wells asked difficult questions regarding the Church's duty of missions. Furthermore, he appealed to theology students to be devoted to missions. However, the leaders of the Church heard von Wells' appeals, and they criticized him. They rejected him, a dreamer and a cult. Facing such criticism, von Wells moved to Poland. Once there, he was ordained by a poor priest. Afterwards, he was martyred in Guyana, which was occupied by the Netherlands. His devotion became a dying grain of wheat. A new interest in missions sprouted in different places. Number 2. Giving shape to missions. Missions began to find its shape more than it did in the past. 1. Missionary training schools were established. The religious Reformation emphasized the saying, "Only by faith are you made righteous." However, there were these side effects were the result of the inconsistency in people's faith and life. August Frank, 1663 to 1727, and his teacher Philip Spener, 1635 to 1705, founded the Pietism movement. Pietism was a challenge to formalistic faith. It was devoted to raising the standard of a Christian's faith. Their revival movement planted the seed of the gospel in people who had the will. As a result, the University of Halle was established in 1698. This university became the center for missions activity, and it served as a forward for foreign missions. Next, we will look at number 2, the organization of Halle Mission and its missions in India. The Halle Mission was the first foreign mission association conceived by the Reformed Church. Frank, who was the preacher for the royal family, and his friend Dr. Luckins, founded the Halle Mission. This mission association was able to send out its first missionaries for foreign missions. Bartholomew Ziegenbalg and Heinrich Plutschau were the first missionaries sent by this church. In July 1706, they landed on the east coast of India. They witnessed the pain the natives were. These people were persecuted and afflicted by Danish officials. Because of the persecution of the colonizers, the two missionaries spent their first night on the ground without a roof. Enduring such suffering, the two learned the language of the land. 10 months after their arrival, on May 12, 1707, the missionaries baptized 5 adult natives. Their reports were published in Europe and gained much attention. The missionaries also won the cooperation of other groups. In 1711, Plutschau died of a disease. Ziegenbalg, who was constantly persecuted by the colonial government, rose to heaven at the age of 36 in 1719. As we have just seen, the work of missions happened through the University of Halle. A new wind was blown into missions in India. Christian Frederick Schwartz, 1726 to 1798, devoted himself as a missionary to India. Starting from 1750, he served as a missionary for 48 years. He received a special gift and blessing of language. With this gift, he spread the gospel to many. Schwartz fluently spoke Tamil, Persian, Hindi, English, and Portuguese. Because he was knowledgeable about the Hindu mythology, Schwartz was able to use this knowledge for gospel missions. He had close ties with India's upper class. He also built churches and schools in various regions of India. Additionally, Schwartz acted as mediator who handled the troubles that occurred between the regional lords and the British government. Number 3. Missions in Greenland. 1. The beginning of missions in Greenland. Hans Egede, 1686 to 1758, and his wife Elizabeth opened the door to missions in the North Pole region. He studied at Copenhagen University. He also ministered in Norway. He developed interest for missions in the Greenland region. In 1721, he and 46 members of an expedition party explored the region of Greenland. There, they encountered Eskimos. He remained in Greenland and continued his missions work. The Eskimos were uninterested in his missions, but he persevered. With his gift of healing, Hans Egede worked for missions. Number 2. Missions of the Moravians. The Moravian Church received its calling to do missions when Pietism began. Members of the Moravian Church called each other the United Brother. Count von Zinzendorf, 17, was the founder of this group, the one who started missions work. The Moravian Church had its beginnings before the religious Reformation. In 1467, Bohemians who followed John Huss joined with the Waldensians and the Moravians to be united in the name Unitas Fratrum. Persecution from opposing groups was strong, but during the time of the religious Reformation, there were about 400 churches. In the 17th century, they were persecuted by the Jesuits, and this almost exterminated the Moravians. In 1722, Christian David led whoever remained to the region of. Here, they were protected by Count Zinzendorf. The Count gave them refuge and land. He also built a village for them. The village was named Herrnhut, which means the Lord's protection. Count Zinzendorf was a very pious man of faith. He studied at Wittenberg University and did his best as a protector of faith. In 1727, he became the religious person in charge of the village of Herrnhut. In 1737, the Count became bishop of the Moravian Church. In 1731, he traveled to Copenhagen to participate in Denmark's Christian VI coronation. He was baptized, and he heard that missions had ceased in Greenland. This caused the Moravian Church to change its direction to be a church of missions. Their zeal for missions was astounding. The average Protestant church, with around 2,000 to 3,000 people, usually sends one missionary, but the Moravians sent one missionary per 92 people. Financially, they were poor, and they did not have a large congregation. Them sending so many missionaries is a miracle in the history of modern missions. Number 4. Indian missions. 1. Faith in the new continent. Those who could not endure the persecution of the British government and the Anglican Church crossed over to the Americas from the early 17th century. In 1620, the Puritans boarded the Mayflower headed for the new continent, and they landed in New Plymouth, which was along the coast of Massachusetts. They began a new movement of faith. They enthusiastically spread the gospel to the Indians. Britain and all of Europe heard this news. More people became interested in Indian missions and missions in the new continent. Number 2. People devoted to Indian missions. Our first person is Roger Williams was born in 1603 and died in 1683. He was the one who discovered Rhode Island. Managing trade between the white people and the Indians, Roger Williams poured out his passion for missions. He learned the language of the Indians and became their friend. He worked 40 years for their good. Second, we have John Eliot. He was born in 1604 and died in 1690. He was called the Apostle to North American Indians. As an alumnus of Cambridge University, Eliot was famous for being an expert of the original language of the Bible. 1630, he crossed over to the Americas, and for the remainder of his life, he focused on Indian missions. One day in 1646, in the house of an Indian chief, he gave a sermon in the Indian language. He continued to do missions work for the people. He organized the people into a collective society and led them in faith. Eliot also translated the Bible for the Indians. This Bible is called the Mohican Bible. The period of translation was from 1661 to 1663. It was the first Bible of the American continent. Despite the risk of his, Eliot continued to evangelize the Indians. When this news reached Britain, various mission groups were formed in Britain, which then participated in missions. Third, the Mayhews. The Mayhews worked 160 years for Indian missions. They did missions work through 5 generations for 160 years. Because of them, Indian churches were established and the fruits of missions were born. Fourth is David Brainerd. He was born in 1718 and died in 1747. He was a member of the Scottish Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. He evangelized the Indians, Stockbridge, Massachusetts. His missionary life only lasted 3 to 4 years. However, his influence was enormous. Inspired by Brainerd, many people devoted themselves to missions. 2 of these people were Henry Martyn and William Carey. We will move on to Chapter 9. Modern Missions. Modern missions began with William Carey. The reason is William Carey gave shape to the organization of missions, and cooperative missions saw success. Before, missions work and funding were both managed by the individual. However, through Carey, there was a more organized cooperation in missions. 1. Enthusiasm for church missions. The discovery of the new continent brought about new changes in the world. Countries from Asia, America, and Africa used every means to establish colonies. Britain created the East India Company. They used this as an instrument for carrying out policies in the colonies. Through pietism, they reaffirmed their duty of missions for the foreign world. The church was liberated from the formalistic nature of the medieval church, and now it began to carry out its duty of foreign missions. Many church leaders had in and devotion for missions emerged. This concludes the 5th lecture on missiology. Thank you.